Okay, yeah, thank you. Thanks, Peter. I can't speak now because you may be a bit emotional. Yeah. So yeah, so how do you speak about sales and how do you speak about it in, let's say, 15 minutes, however long we've got? I take it really a quite high level topic because if we got into how do you ask questions to get the right answers, how do you negotiate? Any specific subject, it would be relevant to maybe a small number of people and maybe not to others, and it'd be really difficult to go through it in a small session or short session. So today I'll focus on this broad question of how do we sell without being salesy? And it's a question that does come around over and over again because so many people feel uncomfortable or awkward about selling. And so really that's the theme I picked on today. And I think the conversation we just had is quite an interesting and helpful lead into it. So if I just do a really brief introduction about us and how we come to be where we are and doing what we're doing. And if you want to just flip to the next chart, Lynn and myself are in the company. We're called Sales Untangled. And I've just realized I can't see the chart. So I'm now saying you can flip to the next chart and I can't see which one we're on. So I'll have to assume we're on the right ones. So Lynn and I run a company called Sales Untangled. And the purpose of the business really is to help business owners make sales more simple and more comfortable. And we published a book, Untangle Your Sales, which we've got a picture of here. And then behind that, and as Pete said about the whole trust thing, we've been a certified B Corp since 2020, which is was quite early really in terms of the B Corp movement in the UK. So we've been a certified B Corp. We're also on the Good Business Charter, which is a much simpler certification if you're interested in that sort of stuff. And we're also signatories to the Prompt Payment Code, which is this whole thing about everybody knows one of the biggest problems for small businesses is not getting money when you owe money, and it's frustrating, it's emotional, but actually it has a really bigger impact on cash flow. So we've always believed in doing business in, if you want to put it that way, in the right sort of way. And somebody did say to me, well, that's interesting. You're a B Corp and you're in sales. How do you square off the two? And so we do really put a big emphasis on how do we make sales more accessible. And my whole career has been in sales. I've built some fantastic relationships with people. I've got lifelong friends out of it. So there is such a thing as loyalty and integrity in selling, but it often doesn't come across that way. So really, that's my start for today. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions, which are going to come up on a Zoom. They're going to come up on screen on a poll, and I'm hoping I'll be able to see the answers, but I can see the poll come up. So if you'd like to fill those 3, it's just 3 quick questions.
Okay, perfect. Martin, we can see the slide.
Fabulous. I can see it now. Yeah, that's great.
Fabulous.
Okay, so do you want to flip down to the next chart? I'll reprise what we just said. So that's still showing the first chart to me. That's the second chart. Okay, so we're best-selling authors, and this chart. So this is the chart about B Corp, a Good Business Charter, Prompt Payment Code. So some of you will recognise some of these logos. And Pete, I think you're signed up to Good Business Charter, aren't you?
Sure are. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the other people in the room, I'm sure are. So can we do the poll now if that hasn't already shared?
Yeah, we've done the poll, mate.
Okay, great. We've got some answers.
Share the results quickly. I think we should be able to see the results now.
Okay, so 89% are saying sales is a critical success factor, which is interesting because that means that 11% didn't think it was. But good grief, 94% think have never been trained in sales, which is even higher.
Wow.
And I didn't fill this in, by the way, so I'm not the 6%. Somebody else is the 6%. And 61% feel a bit uncomfortable sometimes doing things that are salesy. So it's maybe two-thirds of people. Interesting. Very good. That's really interesting. Thanks for filling that in. It gives me a good steer on. I'll be honest, not surprised, but it's interesting to see that. So, okay, we got the. Okay, great stuff. So as I said, the purpose of today really for me is just to talk a little bit about this and say, how do we approach that if we feel a bit uncomfortable about it and we don't quite know what we're doing? So it's quite a dangerous combination for anything we're asked to do in our lives, isn't it? It's not just about sales, but if we don't really know how to do it and also maybe feel a bit uncomfortable about it, it's quite a difficult combination then to say, A, where do I start? And B, how do I make progress and improve it? So if we want to flip to the next chart, one of the questions I'm posing is, so what's the balance of power in selling? And if you're in a business to consumer, I don't know whether many people here are business to consumer, but for business to business people, there often feels like there's this balance of power, and it very often feels like an imbalance in terms of selling. So if we just flip to the next chart, how does it often feel? It feels as the seller. So if you are a small business owner, it often feels like we are a small business owner. We have a need for revenue, and that may be general need, or it might be specifically out of a sales meeting. Usually our pitching or business development or whatever you want to call it is not paid for. So it's time and it costs us, but we don't get paid for it. We are always responsive. If a client or potential client comes to us, we turn things around fast. That's how people work in small businesses. And for us as business owners, it usually feels emotional. It may not be emotional in that transaction, but at the end of the week, having a great week and clients paying us or having a good revenue number makes an emotional difference to us. You look at it in terms of buyers. By buyers, it might be a decision maker, it might be a professional buyer, it might be a company owner, whoever's responsible for doing the buying. Typically speaking, we probably think they are larger businesses. They are very often a budget holder of one type or another. So again, either a company owner or a department, they have resources to call upon. It might be other people they can call upon. Generally speaking, they've got alternatives. Often, in fact, I'd probably say more often than not, they are slow. So you know how it is. You send out a quote after a lot of enthusiastic conversations, and then it goes quiet. So they're very often slow. And I think our assumption would be that very often it feels like they're calculating. So we are pretty straightforward. If we're pitching, this is what you're going to get, this is what we're going to do for you, it's how much it will cost. And then it feels like there are all sorts of other considerations going on, and maybe we're being played off against other people or different projects. So it feels like it's quite difficult. It does feel like an imbalance of power in selling. And I'm interested to know whether that's how you challenge me by all means, but it feels like, I think for small business owners, that's very often how it feels when we're selling stuff. So I guess the question that I then ask is, and if we just flip to the next chart, is, but it may feel like that, but whose rules are you playing by? So there was a football match in the Premier League. I think it was about March or April this year. And famously, it was Liverpool against Luton. And famously, the betting odds on this match were 33-1 that Luton were going to win. And so it became a big national news story. How can it be when you've got two teams, it's a two-horse race, that there is a 1 in 33 chance that Luton Town were going to win that match against Liverpool? And so they called out, or the people on the news called out the Opta Stats, who do a whole load of statistics on the Premier League. And they explained it. If you played this match 33 times, according to all the data we've got, then on one of those 33 occasions, Luton Town will win. It's based on stats. Now, so as we're back into the same thing, that is a little guy taking on the big guy, and how do you win in those circumstances? Now, the difference is, in the Premier League, these guys in the black shirts are on the pitch all the time. So there is somebody on the pitch whose job it is to make sure that the rules are played exactly the same by the little team with a small budget and the big team with a big budget. And it's their job to ensure that the rules are applied equally. Some will even say they favour the big sides because they've got bigger crowds and make more noise and more prestige, better known players. But at least they're at worst, I suppose, they're applied equally. My business is not like that, and I think I'm not suggesting you rip up the rule book and do things that are rude or inappropriate, but we are able to set the rules that we play by in terms of the relationships that we have with our business partners. And so I guess the question that I would pose really is, however difficult it might feel, and however it might feel like there's an imbalance of power between us and the people buying from us, what do you think those people do in the evenings? However difficult the decision maker is, however awkward they are, however long they've ignored you after you've sent out hardly put together, a difficult to put together quote, what do you think they do in the evenings when they get home? And the answer is, when they get home, they do exactly the same stuff as we do. So if you flip onto the next chart, what do they do in the evenings? However difficult they are during the day when they're working with you, what they really want to do when they get home is walk the dog, get some exercise, have a lovely dinner, and play with the kids. That's what they're doing. They're doing exactly the same stuff as us. So back to that thing about the rules we're playing by. If we play by the little company, big company rules, and we try to, we're a bit apologetic, and would you mind if we get some time, and could we do this for you? Then we're playing on a position where we have a position of weakness. Whereas if we think about how do we build a relationship that is built on the things that we have in common and how do we help people, we've got much more chance of moving forward. And I just think we talk in sales, and I think we're right to do it, and we still use the terminology, but we talk about targeting people. And there's a lot of, we've got a lot of marketing people on the call today, and I'm sure we'd all say it's the right thing to do. It makes us efficient, it makes us effective in terms of the way we approach people, but so we should target. But if you flip that and think, imagine you're the person who has the budget and who has the resources, and you are constantly being targeted, and everybody who comes to you is pitching at you, trying to get hold of your budget. So how do you respond to that? How do you feel about that? How do you feel when it literally looks like you've got a target you're stuck on your forehead that people are coming at you? And you ask yourself about networking meetings, and why don't you get big business owners coming to networking meetings? And it's because they know if they walk into a room of small business owners, they'll get pitched at people telling them how good they are. Do you think just emotionally, how difficult is it if you're constantly getting chased by people who are pitching you, trying to get a hand on your budgets? So you then intellectually thinking, yeah, they're pitching me. I've got to dilute what they're telling me, which bits of it are true, which bits of it are not true. So I think it can be really difficult if you get into that spiral of I'm selling, you're buying. It's not a spiral, it's almost like it's a linear head-to-head thing. I'm selling, you're buying, and moving the conversation and the thinking around this to, okay, so what's our common ground? What have we got in common? Then I think it can really help us move forward. So my provocative pitch is what's on the next chart, which is what happens if we stop selling and we start making people feel good. So what if we shift our thinking about this and say, of course we want to get revenue, of course we want to work with people, but if our start point is how do we make people feel good about the interactions we have with them, and use that as a start of the relationship, then is it possible to sell in a more effective and a less salesy sort of way? And I guess as it happens, Pete has probably asked a really clever question in the introduction, because what came out of it was people notice when they've been pitched in a bad way, and we remember the bad experiences we've had with selling. It's quite difficult to remember the ones where actually it really went swimmingly and we felt good about it, and we don't notice, but we make the right decision. So I think that was maybe one of the themes that came out of that discussion. Again, you can argue with me about this, and you can say, oh, is that right? Is it sensible? Is it practical? But what I have done is just put another chart and said, okay, what might that look like if we started to behave in that sort of way? So the next chart just walks through the sales process, really. So, okay, so in terms of a selling process, and I'm thinking here in terms of a meeting, whether that's a face-to-face or a Zoom or whatever it might be, but at each stage of the process, how do we behave differently if we started to think about helping people rather than thinking about pitching? So in the pre-meeting, if you like, and the networking or whatever it is, going to exhibitions, wherever it is you're doing your introductions to people, the first thing is we become more focused. So if we're thinking about helping people, who do we help most often, most easily? Why do we help them the most? And that helps us understand who. We don't just pitch to everybody in the room, we just become much more focused in what we do. And I think this is a conversation that came out in our room about questions. If we ask questions about people and listen to what it is they're trying to fix, rather than pitching what it is we're good at and selling the features, then we've got more chance of understanding. Again, it'll be more focused, but we have more chance of building a relationship. And that relationship is more likely to be about win. So is there something in it for both of us, and how do we work in a relationship that's for both of us? And all that helps us in terms of targeting, makes us more efficient. In terms of pre-meeting, so let's say we've got a meeting fixed up. Some people will do nothing pre-meeting. They'll just turn up for a meeting on the run without preparation. But there are other people who've got a real preference for thinking ahead and don't like to be jumped in meetings, don't like to be pushed to decisions. So pre-meeting, you can ask somebody, you can ask, what questions do you want to have answered? Maybe send across a pre-read or send across an agenda, a very short agenda, send across meeting objectives. At worst, if they don't read it, you've got yourself set up, so you can say, you may not have seen the email, I know you've been busy, but these are the objectives I set out for the meeting. Does that work for you? What else might there be that you want to cover? So it's a neat way of setting things up that some people will respond to better than others. In the meeting, and I guess you'd say this is quite obvious, but there's a whole thing about rapport and finding time to build that rapport. And I do find on Zoom, it takes a bit more of an effort. That I think naturally, if you've driven somewhere, you'll have a little bit of chit chat about what was the traffic like and where have you parked. And on Zoom, that doesn't happen. So sometimes you have to be more conscious about opening up the conversation. And I quite often ask people, well, where are you today? The answer to which is usually, I'm at home. And I'm thinking, yeah, I can see you're at home, you're on Zoom. But where's your home? Where in the country are you? And so sometimes just having that conversation opens up a little bit of rapport before you get into pitching. A really interesting thing to focus the minds of the decision maker in front of you is to ask, what's going to make today worthwhile for you? What are you going to what you hope to get out of today's conversation? What will make it memorable? What will make it useful? So there are various different ways of asking that question. Obviously, question techniques, and like I said, we can't get into question techniques in a short amount of time today. You can find a lot of question techniques if you go on Google. If you just question sales question techniques, if you bear in mind on Google, some of the stuff on there is how do you get clever and trick people, which I really don't agree with. So there are other ways of asking open questions that help to nudge people along to the answer you want to get them to. And this is a really important one. I think it goes back to that thing about customer service we were talking about earlier, which is making it easy for people to say yes. And so even if you've got a dream client in front of you and you think, this is going to be great if we get it, we've really built up to this for a long period of time, it is, if you don't think you're going to get the deal, it is better for you to get them to say yes to something small than to say no to the deal. So even if it's an agreement to come back in 3 months' time and say, look, doesn't feel like today's the right time for you, but there obviously is some interest. We believe we can help you. What if we to schedule a date for 3 months from now? And then you've trained the customer to say yes to you instead of training the customer to say no. And you can think about how this works in terms of quotes. So if you send a quote to somebody, and often these days it's going to go by email, and then you think, I haven't heard. They were really keen, but I haven't heard. And so how long, that big question, how long is the etiquette that I leave it before I follow up? So you give them a couple of weeks and you send another email. Like, oh, I just wondered, have you had time to think about the proposal yet? And then you don't hear. So what do you do then? Is it 2 weeks next time? Is it 1 week? Is it 4 weeks? So after a couple of weeks more, you send another message. I just thought I'd follow up and just making sure you've seen the quote. By the time you've done that 2 or 3 times, you've encouraged the person at the other end to say no, because they're not ready for whatever reason, and they're getting used to saying no. So if you can find a way of getting them to say yes, then you've got much more chance of at least engaging with them and getting them used to doing something with you. And the other thing with a meeting, obviously, and it may be really obvious, but just doing a summary and next steps, just wrapping up, agreeing what the next steps are, and that follows straight into the post meeting bit, which is the DW. Do what you said you will do. And I think most people here, or probably all of us, will say, yeah, but they don't do it, do they? When you agree steps after the meeting, the customer never does what they say they're going to do. All the more reason for us to demonstrate the behaviours we want to get. So always follow up with what you want them to do. Be easy to do business with. Remove friction. We were just chatting about a payment plan for a car, and make sure that things are easy when you want people to follow up with you. So anything that feels like it's lumpy or sticking, if you can remove that friction, it's going to be easier. Varying channels for following up. This is that whole thing about if you send the email every 2 weeks following up on the quote, you'll train them to say no. But if you pop up on their LinkedIn feed or follow them on some other channel, maybe even pick up the phone, you've got more chance of finding a different way into that conversation. Again, finding different people in the organization to follow up with can be really helpful. So that can really work. And finally, maybe this should be a capital F for Fortress. The one other way, and again, I saw some of the marketing people on this call will back this up, is that content can be a really helpful way of driving sales, particularly if you are trying to encourage people and nudge people. So providing them something that's helpful and interesting and useful can be a much better way than just following up saying, have you had time to consider my proposal yet? And so the best book I found on this was a book called Content Fortress, which was a really helpful book for it explains how you build literally a fortress around your business's IP and your way of doing things that helps you communicate with customers better. So we found that really helpful. So here's just some thoughts. You may well add some other things to this, but just some thoughts about, okay, right through that sales process, if your start point is, how am I trying to help people or make people feel good? How might I approach it in a more subtle, more rounded way than just pitching, trying to get the business? Okay, so that's pretty much my message. I realize on the next chart I think this is going to be the biggest QR code, so I do apologize. It looks super. If you want to, it does look large on there. If you want to sign up for our newsletter, we're sending stuff out every month, and we're all putting out sales information posts in that. So by all means, sign up to it. And that's pretty much me now. So we can go. Pete can come up with another random question for the next group, and then I'll stay on a little bit after 9 if people have got specific questions.
Amazing.
Awesome. I'm just gonna